Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our sustainability chats for the month of October. And what a beautiful month it's turning out to be. We're finally getting into some fall weather here in the Driftless. So welcome. My name is Casey Meehan. I am the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at Western Technical College. And in that role, I also help the Sustainability Institute run its programming. And once again, welcome. Thank you for joining us today and this conversation. And I also want to say thank you just to our members and our supporters who make programming like this possible. Our programming is, our sustainability chats are free and open to the public. And really that's because of our members and supporters. So specifically, I want to give a shout out to our committed advocate level of supporters. So Lynn and Todd Huffman, Lee Roche, Western Technical College, and also our cheering champions, Xcel Energy, Dorothy Leonard, Habitat for Humanity La Crosse, Strive to Thrive, and the FSPA, Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. So again, without our members' support, programming like this wouldn't be possible. If you're interested at all in becoming a member of the Sustainability Institute, it's very easy. Go to sustaininstitute.com. And right at the top, right of the screen, you will see two buttons, become a member and donate. If you choose to become a member, select a level that feels comfortable to you. Or if you just like to donate, that's great too. Any donation helps us do our thing here. So thank you to our members, and we hope you enjoyed the chat. So before we get going here, I do want to just remind folks, if you've never been to a sustainability chat with us, it's the format we'll have after a short introduction here. Our guest will speak for a little while, and then there'll be a chance for you to ask some questions. And to do that, if you could please ask those questions via the Zoom chat. So just click on the little chat bubble, type that in, and we will get it and be able to answer or to ask your question to our guest near the end of the conversation today. There's also a quick poll coming out right now. And that's just, have you ever heard of community conservation before today? So if you could take just a couple of seconds and answer that question, it'll actually help our guests sort of know how to best approach this today. Great, just take 5 more seconds or so. All right, so it looks like about half of you have heard of community conservation and half of you haven't. So this will be really new stuff for about half of you. And the other half, I know you're going to learn some great stuff. So any reasonable person can see that we're facing some really major problems, right, globally. So abject poverty, deforestation, climate change, pollution, inequalities across the board, authoritarianism. We can see the problems, right? Those are very, very apparent. But a question that I often get asked is, what are the solutions? What do we do about all these problems? Well, the good news is that the world actually has, we're on it. There's billions of people, literally billions of people around the world who are working on solutions to these, the world's biggest challenges. And the work is framed by a series of interrelated goals that were set out by the United Nations in 2015. They're collectively called the Global Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals. And they address things like stopping biodiversity loss and providing access to basic services for everyone, reducing abject poverty, addressing inequalities, creating more sustainable communities, and reversing climate change. Now, the most exciting solutions, I think, are those solutions that create what's called co-benefits, or benefits that simultaneously help address multiple problems all at once. It gives us the biggest bang for the buck. So imagine, if you would, a project or an initiative that works on goal number 15, which is life on land. So protecting and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity. Well, lots of times when we work on projects like that, there's a co-benefit because it also helps clean up the water in those areas and provide better, safer drinking water for people in those areas. Now, consider then doing a project like this, but doing it in such a way that actually takes into account or listens to indigenous knowledge and local knowledge about how to best conserve an area. And then not only does that, but then provides the resources and offers the resources and help that's needed for local people to take care of their environment in the ways that they know are best, really, reducing inequalities. And by doing that, that also makes those areas, those communities, more sustainable, more resilient to climate change. Well, it turns out there's organizations like that are doing work like that, and one of them is actually based right in the Driftless area. It's called Community Conservation, and it's been catalyzing and supporting community-based organizations since 1989. It's now representing over 200 villages in 14 countries around the globe and protecting over 1.24 million acres of land. So today we are really honored to have Terry Allendorf, who's the Executive Director of Community Conservation, with us today to talk a little bit about the important work that they're doing. Dr. Allendorf has worked on issues of local communities and conservation since 1994. She earned her PhD in conservation biology at the University of Minnesota and has substantial experience with conservation policy and community level programs. She was
Hi everyone, this is Carrie from the Sustainability Institute. I'm the executive director here. It appears that Casey is frozen and it may take a moment for him to come back. I'm just going to take a pause here and see if Casey can rejoin us. Otherwise, Terry, if you're ready, I think you can hop in. We had a little bit of a truncated presentation there from Casey, but I think everyone can agree we're excited to hear from you today. So everyone, please welcome Terry.
Hey, great. Thank you. And yeah, sorry for that. Thanks to Casey and Carrie for inviting me today. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen then to start the presentation. And thanks to Lirosh for setting us up in the first place. Let's see. Share screen. Here we go. And thanks everyone for coming today. I recognize some names, so I guess that's why we're about half and half in terms of people who've heard of us. So thanks to everyone who's heard of us, who came today. And for all those of you who don't, you hopefully will learn a lot. I'm going to take us on a tour of the world today. And everyone, you can all hear me. Is everything okay, Carrie? Everything looks good?
Everything looks and sounds great. Thanks, Terry.
Okay, good. Okay, so we are Community Conservation, and I'm going to be talking about community conservation from Wisconsin to the world, because community conservation has very deep roots here, both community conservation with capital C's and with little c's. So some of you may know our founders, since many of you are probably in La Crosse or the Driftless area. Dr. Rob Horwich was our founder back in the 1980s. Unfortunately, he died in 2017, and so we are transitioning from being a founder organization still. I've been on the board for over a decade and have worked with Rob publishing and doing projects, and have been the executive director for about 3 years now. And Rob and I really shared one core belief, and from all the work that we've both done separately and together, and that is that communities really will conserve biodiversity, and they want to conserve biodiversity if given the support and the opportunity to do so. And the reason I say that community conservation has really deep roots in Wisconsin is because one of the first community conservation programs that's been written about and recognized is the Coon Valley Soil Conservation Project, which is quite near to Viroqua and Gaze Mills, where Rob lived for many years. And as Kurt Miney, a Wisconsin-based conservation biologist, has said, the solution today is the same as it was 90 years ago, locally led conservation. And so this example from Wisconsin really led the way in many ways in thinking about how communities, farmers, people living on the land can really contribute to conservation if given the support and the information to do so. And I just want to kind of highlight that Rob was involved in so many projects and organizations in Wisconsin, many of which you have either maybe been involved in or you've seen. This is a list of them. And he also was he was the person who created the crane costume for International Crane Foundation. Not many people know that, so that the chicks wouldn't imprint on humans. So that's someone in one of the costumes he designed. So since the 1980s, community conservation has worked on more than 30 projects with communities in 17 countries. And this is, there's pins there for all the places. We worked across all the continents, basically, mainly developing country. And I just want to highlight two of our most well-known, where we don't actively support the communities anymore, but I visited all the sites I'm going to talk about today, actually, so I can answer questions about them pretty easily. Two of our most well-known ones was the Community Baboon Sanctuary in Belize, which was the very first project where Rob learned the importance of communities, because he went to Belize and all of these howler monkeys, black howler monkeys, were living on farmers' land, on private land. And he realized that to save this population in this area, he'd have to work with the communities to do so. And then the second, probably most famous one, is the Golden Langur Conservation Project in Manas Biosphere Reserve and other surrounding areas in Assam, India. And I just came back from there a couple of weeks ago. That was my first visit to that site. Even though I primarily work in Nepal, and I'd met people from the site about 10 years ago. So it was great to go see what they're doing. If you look either of these programs up online in a Google search, you'll find a ton of information about them and the role that communities have played. My own history goes back to 1991 in Nepal in terms of community conservation. I was a Peace Corps volunteer doing fisheries, and then went back and did my dissertation research at the University of Minnesota in Nepal. The woman on the left there is Lakshmi, and I'm still friends with her. She's still a mover and shaker in her community for conservation, for health, for education. I mean, one thing I've discovered is that there's conservationists everywhere, and they're usually trying to do a lot to help their communities in a bunch of different ways. And she's an example of that. And then I want to highlight Nepal really quickly, because Nepal, before I get into our particular projects for CC, Nepal is an example of, if you work in Nepal, you have hope for the future, because all those co-benefits that Casey was just mentioning, Nepal and its policies that it has set to support communities really set an example for the world in terms of how to do conservation. So in Nepal in the 70s, it was predicted by scientists that Nepal would lose all of its forest by 2000, and then its rhinos and tigers, among other species, would disappear by 1980. And now through community forestry and protected area buffer zone policies that help communities participate in conservation, their forest cover has actually doubled since the 1990s. It's gone from 26 to 45% of the total land area, and 1/3 of all households participate in community forestry in a user group protecting a forest, and they protect about 1/3 of Nepal's forest, with another third being in protected areas and the final third being in general government forests. There's also been zero poaching of rhinos. They have a very successful rhino conservation program. And tigers, it's one of the few countries where they reached the WWF goal of doubling the number of tigers the country had by 2022. And there's many other success stories in Nepal. And you can read more about that if you look it up, and New York Times has a great article about it too. So there's lots of information online. And I also want to point out, for those of you who are very interested in the issue of population, that this is in the context of some of the most densely populated areas in the world. And I just love these graphics. You can see Asia here. You can see Asia and how this is like a graphical representation, right, of population. So look how densely populated India is, kind of in the middle there, and then Eastern China. And then if you look at the top part of India on the right-hand side of your screen, that's the Himalaya area. That's where Nepal is. So they may be, you could even almost say sometimes the more people you have, the better management you can do, because you have people actively on the ground managing and appreciating that biodiversity. But I do want to point out that if you went and talked to any particular person who works in Nepal, you might get me, who's talking about the glass half full side, or you might get the person who's talking about the glass half empty. And when I'm in Nepal, I spend quite a bit of my time trying to remind, especially younger conservationists, what Nepal has achieved, right? Because no matter how much success you have, there's always success breeds new issues and new problems. So human wildlife conflict is increasing because wildlife is increasing. And, they still haven't solved all of the equity issues. People are not all benefiting from conservation in equal ways or equitable ways. So there's still many, many things that can be improved. But if you can look over the whole 50-year history, it's so amazing what they've achieved. And every country could do so much more if they really were supporting communities. I just want to talk briefly about what makes us different. One of our slogans is there on that water bottle, a conservationist in every village. And I think that's one thing that makes us different is often you hear people talk about community conservation with small c's, and they might be talking livelihoods or, substitutions or different projects like that. And what we mean is the people themselves, the communities, having the capacity to conserve biodiversity themselves. So having some form of tenure over the land, being able to make rules over the management of the land and enforce those rules. So it's really about biodiversity conservation by communities. And we know we don't need to convince people. We've worked all over the world and we don't need to convince people. They usually are asking for help when they know what we're there to do. They want help to do this. So there's a lot I could cover there, and I'm happy to answer more questions about any of that. But I wanted to give you kind of a tour of our current projects. Again, I visited all of these sites that I'm going to be talking about today. So we're first going to go to Peru, where in every country we work through a local partner. So in the case of Peru, the partner is the Neotropical Primate Conservation Group. Rob, our founder, worked with them in 2009 and 2011. And what they did was he went and helped them run large workshops in the 2 districts of Peru where they worked up in the north to invite different stakeholders, government people, NGOs, local community leaders, and say, hey, here's what we want to do. We want to create community conservation areas. In Peru, they're called community concessions. Almost every country has some kind of policy that does allow communities to officially get some form of tenure over land they want to protect. In Peru, it's called a conservation concession. So they ran these workshops, and ever since then, and as part of what we call conservation contagion, NPC has been supporting groups that have asked for help. So to date, they've created 11 locally run protected areas or conservation concessions. And currently this year, they're working on 4 more. So the sky's kind of the limit. They could create as many as they have the capacity to do. They do take a lot of paperwork. Communities can't do it alone. So the policies are not perfect. It also takes a lot of financial support from the NGO because of the paperwork that does have to get done, the different surveys, management plans, things like that. And interestingly, in Peru, in these concessions, people cannot extract from them. So when we talk community forestry and the other examples, people can extract, you can make money from selling some products usually, but in Peru, these areas are totally closed off for conservation. So, but the communities still have to have a sustainable finance plan for them to show the government, and that often involves NGO support. And so they've created these protected areas, protected a lot of land, and 16 primate species, among many others, of course, but their main focus is on primates. And I love the photo there of Sam. He's one of the founders. He's actually from Britain, but their slogan is Primates Protecting Primates. And Sam right now is the father of 2 young children, so he's doing a lot of protection of his own little primates whenever I visit. I just want to show you here's the first site, some examples of sites that they're actively working at now. They just finished the management and survey plan for Yantalo site, which, so there's 16 farmers who have the land below this mountaintop, and then the forested area is what they want to protect for water because it's helping their farms, and they want to protect it from outsiders who are coming in and degrading the area, and they can't do that unless they create some form of a concession. Here's the San Martin titi monkey that lives there. It's critically endangered, so NPC is doing a lot of research on this species to help get the concession conserved. A little baby there. We got that when we were there this last January. Here's one of the farmers in the middle and his wife next to him, who are supporting students and volunteers who come with NPC to work on the management plan and the biodiversity surveys. And then that's me and my son when we're visiting them. Here's another example. They have some tamarin. They have an endemic Andean saddleback tamarin that lives there that we also got to see. And then the least concerned species, but a porcupine that when we were looking for the San Martin titi monkey, it was like, oh, wait, there's a porcupine in the tree. So lots and lots of stuff going on, even though it's not a huge site. Another site is Delta, which is an interesting example. It's not a totally new site, but the paperwork is currently getting redone. So NPC helped Delta 10 years ago create the site and do the paperwork. And then in Peru, you also have the organization that wants to protect the site also has to be, have elected representatives and be registered. And the leadership changed in Delta, which meant they needed to re-register from scratch because of those changes. So I was there when and part of what they want to do is protect it for water because it feeds into an urban area and into all of their farms, and people are coming in and degrading the area, squatting, burning. And here's some of the farmers. This is Nestor at the computer. And when we got there, and Nestor was excited because we were going just to see the one Delta site and talk to them about redoing their management plan and stuff. And then the farmers were like, wait, we've got other groups of farmers who also want to participate and do their own concessions. So they've got like three different areas that now want to create concessions. And so you're talking about, a much broader area that will help protect water and all the species that are in there, including primates. And that's, we call that conservation contagion. We found that when you get one community going on a project and they're excited about what they're doing, they share what they do with other communities, and those other communities often call and say, hey, can we get help too? We want to do a similar thing. We're going to move on to Cameroon now in Africa. This was actually the last place that Rob visited before he died in 2017. And our partner there is Community-Based Biosynergy Management, which is a new NGO, but the leader of it, who's Dennis down there in the striped shirt at the bottom, he's worked with Rob for quite a while on gorilla conservation in different areas. And he's created this NGO a couple of years ago to start his own projects. And I visited with them, I guess, 2 years ago now in the spring. And the first thing, sort of similar to Peru, one of the first things Dennis did was have a capital level national meeting where we got people together to talk about what is community forestry in Cameroon look like. So in Cameroon, they do have policies for community forestry. They're very popular in the southeast where there's very high value hardwood timber. So there's a lot of community forests registered down there, but in other parts of the country, there aren't. And also because it's focused around the high value timber, what Dennis had seen was that most of the conversation is just about money for communities, and no one's talking about, from the community's perspectives, all the other benefits they're getting out of it. So often communities get a lot of pressure to make a lot of money from their forests. And this happens in Nepal too, where they might actually have a whole, they do have a diversity of benefits that they want to try and maximize from the forest. So initially we wanted to have a conversation about that. So we held a workshop. And at these types of workshops, one thing I like to do is talk about the example of Nepal. So here I am sort of talking about what's been achieved in Nepal with community forestry. And so one of the people who came to that meeting was a chief. He's there in sort of the white outfit, and he's showing Dennis some forested area where there's a remnant population of chimps. This is up in kind of northwest central Cameroon. So not where there are any community forests and not where the government has any registered. They've never registered a community forest up there. So this chief has said, we want to make this a community forest, one of the first in this type of savanna area, and we want to protect the chimps, and we can see that they're moving farther and farther away and have less habitat. And this is on the border with Nigeria, so they have some cross-border threats that are occurring with grazers and cattle coming over and burning fields and degrading the forest, and then the local people plant crops there, temporary crops. So when I went with them in that first trip, we did find chimp nests, and since then they've been camera trapping and they found chimps. So we know there are chimps in the area. We don't know what larger population they're connected to or what the corridors look like. That's part of what Dennis is working on now. Here's some of the Nigerian people who come across on very small trails on their motorbikes, bringing oil in and then taking foodstuffs back out to Nigeria. Here's a meeting with the chief there on the left-hand side, sort of talking with Dennis and other leaders about the project and what it might look like. And one thing they've been doing is some education activities, which many of our partners do with young kids in the schools. So here they've got spiders and snakes are very, very important to this group of people in Cameroon. And so here they're having an art contest to draw spiders. And then here's a museum in the nearby town that has a spider at the top, and then you can see the snake heads. So that's pretty interesting culturally. A second site is with Baka communities down in the Jaw Faunal Reserve, which is in the southeast. And this is a well-established community forest. You can look them up. There's lots of published articles. Lots of scientists have gone down there and focused on the community forestry timber side of things. But this leader who had come to our workshop asked us if we could help them with wildlife conservation, because when they got this piece of forest, they thought, okay, now we can go back to our traditional hunting, right? This is our land now. But they realized the land is too small. It's much smaller than the area forest. And he's sort of drawing a map there in the video. It's much smaller than what they had traditionally. So they've got to figure out how to hunt in a sustainable manner in a much smaller area. So they want help with wildlife monitoring in this case, even though the community forestry is well established. Here's some of the timber that's getting taken out. And so in this area, Dennis is working to create, he's got about 10 villages where they volunteered to be part of a wildlife monitoring project with 2 volunteers in each village, learning how to use software on smartphones so they can monitor wildlife and hopefully begin to collect the data necessary for them to work out a sustainable management plan for wildlife. Now we're going to move on to Nepal, which is similar to Cameroon in that there's already community forestry existing there very strongly, like I mentioned, but not much wildlife conservation outside of protected areas. So we first went there. This is another project that Rob was initially part of. We went, CC first went to Nepal in 2012 and held an initial training in Chitwan National Park, which was in the center of Nepal. And Rob had this vision. Let's see, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer here, but on the left-hand side, you've got an area that's very close to Chitwan National Park, and then you can go all the way into India to the Manas Biosphere Reserve in the upper right-hand corner where it says Nepal, and you can get into as far east as the Manas Biosphere Reserve in India. And Rob had this idea you could create a wildlife corridor stretching that whole way. Elephants are already moving across that landscape with certain barriers in their way. Tigers could move across it if we did the right form of conservation. And so Rob had this really long-term vision of creating a community wildlife corridor there. And so that's what we've been working on. So far, we've been camera trapping in the far east in the districts of Joppa and Morong down there in the lower right-hand corner, and then we'll be moving on to Sunsari and Saptari this year and working on more on camera trapping. And what we do is we camera trap, and here's like the best video we got because it has a baby pangolin on the tail of the mother. So that's pretty exciting. So we get video like this. Initially in this project, we just kind of wanted to raise awareness in the communities of what wildlife they had and sort of ask them if they were interested in doing wildlife conservation in their forest management plans. And so here's an example of another forest where we pieced together all the camera trapping, the good video footage. We also have photos, but I just put together some video to show them. And then last spring, we went and did workshops in these communities. And what they told us as part of these activities is that poaching is really a big problem for them. So what they have is local poachers who are known to the police who sell deer meat to police and local authorities. And so even if the communities report them, they tend to get arrested for maybe a night and then released. So there's not much support to stop the poaching. And so what we've done is in the protected areas of Nepal, in the buffer zones, communities have successfully about 10 years ago started groups called community-based anti-poaching units. And those are only around protected areas right now. So we took representatives from the sites we're working to see Chitwan National Park and to meet these, what they're called Sibapus, and to see what they're doing for wildlife conservation. So they, around their own community forest, will do patrolling and report poachers, and they do a bunch of other activities like trying to decrease the use of plastic, which has been found to be killing a lot of wildlife in Nepal, and other sort of conservation issues like that. So when we went back just last month, I just got back from that trip, or 2 weeks ago now, the 2 districts decided they wanted to create their own Sibapu at the district level and advocate for wildlife in their districts and wildlife conservation. And so we're going to be supporting them also over the next year, even as we move farther west and try and piece together this network. Here we are showing, we went around to many of the individual forests and showed them the wildlife that we got in the camera traps. People are very, very interested because there's so many species, even if you know they're there, you don't see them, right? Unless you have like camera trapping at night and things. So let's see, I gotta move faces here. So now we're gonna move over to Myanmar. So in Myanmar, it's a little bit different model with our partners there. I've been working in Myanmar since 1999, and I brought it into the community conservation community fold about 6 or 7 years ago now. And what they have done is they worked a lot on protected area management plans getting contracts to do those throughout the country. And so they met a lot of local leaders, because as part of that, and part of the work I had done with them starting back in 1991 was to do socioeconomic and like attitude perception surveys around the protected areas so that we could include communities in the management plans. And so based on that, they know around all the protected areas where really motivated conservation community leaders are. So community leaders who want to conserve biodiversity, who want to work on wildlife conservation and environmental issues. So here's an example of all the different national parks where they worked. And so we've had 3 or 4 trainings up in their training center, which they call the Biodiversity Heroes Training Center. And they've trained a bunch of people at that training center to do conservation, like to develop their own community-based projects. Because in Myanmar, there's very little support for communities to do conservation. Well, and especially now, I mean, it's been very difficult the last couple of years now working. We are slowly they're able to get out and do some training, but it's been very slow. They do have community forestry in Myanmar, but the government to date over the past 15, 20 years does not like to hand out certificates for it. So Friends of Wildlife has been struggling to get certificates, but in lieu of that, they've been trying to build the capacity of local people to do their own conservation and not wait for like official recognition from anybody. And so we've trained nearly 100 local community leaders. And now they're working up in the Northwest area with the Naga, which is an indigenous group up in the Northwest that goes over into India also, because they've said, please come help us. They've got some beautiful wetlands that they want to conserve. So that's what they've been working on more recently. Then we're going to go to Thailand. And Thailand is a very particular situation where we're working is inside of national parks. So there is community forestry. There's some support for community conservation in Thailand, but in the Tung Yai National Parks, East and West, there is very little because those communities live inside the national park. And if the government could still resettle people, they would probably resettle these communities. But you can't really do that anymore under all the agreements that have been signed in human rights agreements. So these communities have sort of boundaries drawn by the government around them that say, you must stay within this area. These are your agricultural fields. This is your traditional use area. You can't go outside. So the person that I work with is at the University of Minnesota, and he is a tiger researcher, and he can see that way outside of those boundaries into the national parks, there are still no tigers usually using a huge area in the park, probably because of some kind of disturbance coming from the villages. Either they're illegally hunting, which we don't know if that's what's happening, or somehow the prey is disturbed in that area, so the tigers can't come in. And so this faculty person would really like to get communities more engaged in conservation and trying to figure out what's causing the lack of tigers in that area, just because their tiger population is not so secure in Thailand. So we can see we have a Packer fan down there in the lower right-hand corner, one of the staff that works with the Sub Foundation that we're working with. So there we're really starting from scratch. There aren't that many policies to support the work. It's really trying to understand from community perspectives what's going on, and then what their conservation goals might be and how those could align with the park, and just trying to figure out what's happening in that area. Okay, last site we're going to go to is Indonesia, Borneo, Sarawak. I'm sorry, Malaysia. I said Indonesia, Malaysia in Sarawak. And these are the roads, although they're quickly building many new roads that use cars through the area and building bridges. But this is the traditional roads that we use to get up to the site. And the site is actually near a protected area where the Smithsonian started camera trapping about 4 years ago for a master's project for a student here at the University of Wisconsin. And she invited me to come 2 years ago with her because she was wrapping up the master's part of her camera trapping and was really interested in trying to turn this project into a community project. The community has talked about orangutans aren't coming as close to their longhouses. The hornbills don't have as many trees that they like to nest in. So they would like to do some conservation activities. But this is a site where Olivia was, they were paying people, they're paying the men to help camera trap. And so you've got to turn it from like a paid gig into, in the national park, into what do you want to do in your own communities? And there won't be salaries necessarily, but we can support what you as a community decide you want to do. So we've been talking with them about agroforestry more recently and trying to renew some of this. Is a rubber plantation we're standing in here, which is one of the things that hornbills don't appreciate too much, or orangutans. So talking about how to convert some of that land. And here what happened was 2 years ago, Olivia also said she wanted to involve the women because she'd never worked with the women. And she's like, and I don't want to ask them because I feel like I might be burdening them with more work, right? They already have too much work to do. And I don't want to give them more or make them feel like they should do it. And I said, well, but we have no choice, right? When you're working with women, you just have to ask them. And again, working in Nepal, I'm really lucky because Nepal has policies from the top down that state you should have 30 to 50% representation of women at everything, every committee, every meeting. It's just built in, and they succeed more or less depending on what you're looking at, but it's just ingrained in us when you work in Nepal that women should be a part of that. And so I said, we just have to ask the women, right? You have to ask them, you have to invite them. And they said, yeah, why didn't you show us how to camera trap 2 years ago? We would have loved to be involved. So we did an impromptu 1.5-day camera trap training with them right there in the field when we were there. And then Olivia's been carrying that on with them. And one of the longhouses has a new woman leader who's very interested in the project. So here are the women learning how to camera trap. They had a good time. And again, it builds everyone's capacity, right? So there can be jobs in wildlife conservation. People can learn new skills that will help them in many different ways. So currently, that was sort of a whirlwind tour of some of our projects. And so currently we are directly supporting communities like I just described at these sites. We're also creating a partner network. So even though Rob had sort of worked with all these different places with different partners, he never really brought them together. And so we have a once a month meeting, something that Zoom allows us to do now. We sort of are all used to meeting this way, where we have the partners come together and talk once a month. And we're slowly building identity. We're answering each other's questions. We're a support group. And I think a lot more is going to come out of that as we really share the lessons of our approach and what we've learned across so many countries. And we also offer online courses and workshops, which we're slowly developing as we have a chance. These are new things that we've done in the last couple of years. So in-country workshops, and then also trying to get courses up online for people to really share. I know there's so many students who might be, ecologists or natural scientists, but they really want to include communities. That's one audience who they just want to learn how to work with communities and support them. They see the need to have communities involved. So there's a huge desire out there amongst a lot of people to learn more about our approach to community conservation. And then just to briefly say what you can do, you're welcome to learn more at our website, communityconservation.org. You can sign up for our newsletter and email updates so you get more information about what we're doing on a regular basis. You're always welcome to donate. We have really been trying to get to a point of sustainability with individual donations, because often in the old model that Rob used, if we didn't get grant money, we didn't get to do a project. So we actually dropped Nepal for a few years. So I'm trying to come up with a sustainable model based on primarily individual donations that really create sustainability for us so that we can make commitments to the communities and then not follow up on those because we didn't get grant money. You're welcome to follow us on social media. We've been doing a lot of posting on our activities as I do my trips. It's a more up-to-date way to see what's happening. And please share our work with your friends and family, anyone that you think would be interested in what we're doing. We've got so many amazing partners, and there's so many communities out there that want support. So we really look forward to growing and sharing more. And, the community in the Driftless area was, Rob's rock solid foundation for all the work he's been doing since the 1980s. So we really appreciate all the support we've gotten from the Driftless area. And I think that is the end of my slides. So I'm happy to take questions.
You bet, Terry. Thank you so much. I'm back. I'm unfrozen, so hopefully it'll stay this way. Sorry for the disruption. So the first question I have might be, I don't know if this is it might be asking like a parent who their favorite kid is, but I'm curious, do you have a favorite project?
I mean, I have to say Nepal because I've worked there since 1991.
Yeah.
And Nepal's so successful. There's so much happening. I also love Nepal because right now there's a lot of young conservationists who are really active and are really trying to do their own research and their own projects. looking for their own support. And I don't know how many of them will make it without feeding into like what we call the bingos, the big environmental NGOs like WWF or Zoological Society of London or something, but they are amazing to work with. We've been one of our new sites I didn't really talk about in Nepal was a human leopard conflict site in the Kathmandu Valley, actually, where someone came and said, hey, can you guys help us with this issue? So the day I left, we did one last workshop in that community to initiate that project. So, but all of the places are amazing, right? They've all got just amazing things happening.
Is there a criteria that you use to pick communities? I mean, I imagine there's projects literally all over the world that you could choose. So what is it that attracts your organization to choose, one project over another?
Yeah, so at this point, we're building a lot on the foundations of places where Rob worked and the existing partners before we expand, right? So I think, yeah, the sky's the limit in terms of expansion, but right now we're trying to build a core set of projects and then partners and then expand from there. So all of these areas are, biodiversity hotspot in some respect or other, because it's already biodiversity focused partners that are working in those areas. And then this community is asking for help, right? We're not going into places and saying, hey, you need to do this, right? And even when Rob did go into places sometimes, because he was very focused on primates and he might be, I want to work on this primate. I think that's how he first went to India and Assam, was someone invited him to come look at the golden langur there. But he said, hey, are you guys interested in doing this, right? Do you want support to conserve the monkey? And they were like, yes, please. And so it was a, collaborative relationship from the beginning.
Well, that's interesting. It brings up a question in my mind. Do you ever get pushback from, whether it's from the community or others, other NGOs or any governments or anything like that give you any pushback and make it more challenging to do your work?
I have not. I can't think of any communities pushing back. I think we have one partner who talks a lot about, he doesn't have that much experience with communities, and he's always worried about managing expectations, because he's worrying about sort of, what if we promise too much, or what if we, and what I always say is, if we do this right, we're not promising anything. If we do it right, we're giving them support. So even if our funding ended and we left tomorrow, everything we do is to build their capacity for management of biodiversity, like, learning how to camera trap or monitor, or governance. So supporting the creation of groups who can govern within the community and have discussions. So I always like to say, there's no endpoint we're trying to get to necessarily. We want to conserve the biodiversity, that's the endpoint, but we do that through really working closely with the community to meet their needs and build their capacity. So no matter when we leave, they're left with something, right? And even if it's because of conflict in some of the countries, right? Like in Myanmar, things get slowed down, and you just hope that, they've got the foundation and the capacity continue for their own communities. And then I was also going to mention, when you talked about co-benefits at the beginning, in Nepal, where you see when they had civil conflict 10, 20 years ago, the one functioning institution that was democratically elected in the communities was the community forest user groups. All the other government, all of it at every level, fell apart during the civil conflict, right? So at the local level, there was no governance from who it should have been coming from. And so these community forest user groups were strong enough and had the capacity to distribute money, distribute food, distribute anything that was coming into the community during the conflict and during the earthquake that happened in 2015. Some of you may remember the big earthquake they had. And again, it was those community forest user groups that were still electing people, still functioning, and it didn't fall apart during an episode like that. So the co-benefits of this governance and management over your natural resources and environment just extends into everything. It's huge, especially because we're working so much with women, trying to include, half women, half men as much as possible.
So speaking of that, there's a question from Diana. You mentioned about involvement of women. I did notice in some group photos, no or very few women. Is that a cultural barrier that might prohibit their involvement?
Yes, it can be very hard. So if we compare Nepal to Myanmar, when I started working in Myanmar in the 2000s, when we were starting to do the first workshops, just me as a researcher, not with CC at that time, and I told them we need to invite half women to the meetings. And because I've worked in Nepal, I feel comfortable saying that, right? Because it's not culturally normal in Nepal either for women to be involved in everything. But I already seen if you ask, it will happen, right? And it's good to ask women to be involved. So in Myanmar, they'd say, but that's not what we do. We don't invite women. They're busy. They have kids. They can't come. And I said, I don't care. We invite them, we give them an opportunity, we explain to them and to the male leaders why we're saying this, right? Because there's good reasons when you're talking about, well, anything to do with the community, but especially natural resources, right? People use them differently. We need everyone's voice to tell us where they are, what they're using. And so even there, we would get half and half at the village level if we asked and explained. And so, but it can still be hard. And at some of our partners, like in Peru is like, that seems the hardest. The level of machismo, it's just a different thing in South America than even in Asia. And so that's been kind of a conundrum, and I haven't worked there as long. And it's primarily men running the project. And I think they haven't had the Nepal experience that like I've had. They don't know that and they are up, there's a different cultural context that I don't fully understand either. So yeah, so it can be very hard. That's why some of the pictures, there's no women, right? Because it's not happening yet, but we'll get there.
What about folks in Viroqua? So you've got a chapter there, right? And there's membership or members.
That's where our office is. Yeah, our office is in Viroqua.
So are there others like in Viroqua that help support your organization locally or globally, or like, I guess so one question I have is, there's this chapter in Viroqua. Do they do anything unique? I mean, it's you, but are there other citizens that are sort of helping out with that? And then on top of that, and you got it sort of in your end at the end there, what can others do? Like, what can folks here in La Crosse do to help?
So yeah, thinking about it in terms of Viroqua and what's happening, that list of organizations, a lot of those are based in Viroqua or nearby areas like up in Sauk. So, I mean, what Rob did living in that area, and he was able to just spend all of his time going to meetings locally. So when he wasn't traveling, he was going to meetings locally and getting those organizations going. So when I look around there, I'm like, so many of those organizations are doing community conservation because Rob either supported or was feeding into what they were doing. So Valley Stewardship Network or Crawford Stewardship Project. So many of them Rob had his fingers in. And it's not like we're the only ones who've discovered the beauty of community, right? Doing conservation. There's so many projects. And so I feel like here in the US, there's usually many, many examples. And we have been looking at ways to try and, where can we fit in with those communities? But in a way we don't, because there's already so many communities. There's already been so much that has been done in that area that's already working with communities. And so it's not like we have a chapter there. I mean, we are just one organization, very small right now. That's just where our office is actually physically located there. And we try to keep our core there. It's been really important to our board since Rob was from the Gaze Mills area, and then Baroque was sort of like a big, the home area, to stay connected to that area. Yeah.
Sure. Help us paint sort of a bigger picture here. Why is the work that community conservation is doing around the world, why is that important to people here in the Driftless? How do those things connect?
Well, biodiversity and climate change, right? So if I have numbers, I avoided all the numbers and the more academic stuff in my 25 minutes. But if you look at the numbers, their estimates that 6% of the population is considered indigenous globally, and they already have some sort of management, or they're living and protecting, even if it's just informally, about 30% of the globe right now. So if you supported, and that's just the indigenous people, if you had local communities, which is basically any rural community, you get up to nearly 50% of the world's population, and you're going to cover a majority of the land, right? If you're supporting communities to do conservation, that is going to mitigate or avert the biodiversity crisis to a huge extent, because so many of these communities want to do that, but their rights are not recognized, right? The logging concessions, the mining, right? All those things are coming in. So these communities, if they have the right policies in place, they're the first line of defense. And this is a problem in Malaysia, with the project we can see, is that there's a lot of talk about indigenous peoples. Like when you think Malaysia, you think indigenous peoples. I mean, at least when you think conservation, but the policies don't really seem to support them to actually do anything, to actually do management, to have rights and responsibilities over the land. So we're trying to sort through, like, what can the community actually do legally, and can they get any support to do that? Or are they just kind of on their own? Like the community we're working with has actually stood on the road on what they consider the edge of their territory and stopped the logging companies from coming in. Or they've personally gone out and arrested grabbed poachers and taken them to the authorities, but they don't necessarily have any right to actually do that according to the law. It's all very gray. And so every situation is a little bit different. But if those were recognized and they were supported, which of course that's very radical, right? We recognize really that's the most radical thing you can do is give communities rights like that, right? I do like to point out that it's not just their right. Most of the conservation at the community level doesn't work without some kind of polycentric governance, we say, right? Where they can't do it alone. They need the NGOs, like I was saying, in Peru to help with paperwork, or in Nepal to think about wildlife. They don't have access to the information. So it takes government, it takes NGOs, it takes the community all collaborating together to really do a good job. And that is going to mitigate and avert the biodiversity crisis in probably the most efficient way, if we could make that happen, and climate change, right? Climate change. If you just had communities protecting areas and keeping them from getting cut down, we would be a long way towards mitigating that issue too. I mean, obviously there's huge systemic top down, but without the bottom up from communities, we're not gonna get there.
Sure. So I've got one final question for you before we wrap things up, and that is, if there was only one thing that you hope the people in the audience today do as a result of this conversation, what would it be?
It would be to think about, I mean, I don't know how many people in this audience, most people have done something with the environment, have participated in some community activity, probably have walked in a park in La Crosse or wherever, where some community person has made that area happen, has made that area exist, right? And so I wish people would walk away really understanding that communities everywhere, they may look so different from ours, they may look poor, they may look impoverished, and they're not. They're just not. They need the same opportunities as we have to be involved, well, in whatever sector. If you want to volunteer for health or education or natural resources, right? People in those communities, like I mentioned, my friend Lakshmi at the beginning, people there are just as motivated to help their communities. And often they're just in a really tight situation in how they can do that, given that the government is not always supporting it very much in different ways. And so that I would hope people walk away really thinking about the fact that when you support a project or a group like ours, you're really supporting communities like yours, but they just happen to be a long way away to have the same opportunities we have here to protect our environment.
Sure. Great. Thank you for spending time with us this afternoon, and telling us about the really interesting and important work that community conservation is doing. It's kind of blows me away looking at that map and all the parts of the world that you're connecting to and impacting.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the chance.
Really amazing. So again, thank you for joining us. Before we head out, I do want to turn things over to Carrie Thompson just for a minute. And Carrie, let me get my slides set up here. Okay. Carrie, take it away to tell us a little bit about the next event coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. I just wanted to invite everybody here in the room to our next event, which is the Inspiring Sustainability Awards. It's a really magical and fun event where we get to celebrate the great work that's happening here. We took nominations from the community, and from those 17 nominations, we're going to share with you today who those 17 individuals and organizations are. You can see them here on your screen. From these 17 organizations, our executive board votes and chooses one winner for an individual award winner and one winner for an organizational winner. You can read about all of these winners across our social media on Facebook, Instagram, or directly on our website. And then Casey, if you can go back to that other slide prior, I just want to let everybody know that this event happens at one of our previous award-winning locations, which is La Crosse Distilling Company. It's a great event for all of us to come together, to network, to mingle, and to celebrate. Tickets are live now on our website, sustaininstitute.com/upcoming events. And our members and supporters do receive free tickets. So if you are a member or supporter of the Sustainability Institute, you will find a member ticket option right on that platform. Or if you'd like to consider becoming a member of our organization to help support our programs that we do, you can become a member today and then have that free ticket applied for this event as well. So if Casey, you want to go back, I just want to again recognize all of these amazing individuals, organizations, businesses, and projects that were nominated this year. All of these nominations came directly from our community, and we put those nomination reasonings right on our website so everyone could see the amazing work that we're doing. Special shout out to a few people who are in the room with us today and are nominated, both Andrew and Patrick. Congrats on your nominations. And we hope for everyone to join us in November.
And that brings us to an end here. There will be a poll that pops up here in just a second, just asking for some feedback that the Sustainability Institute takes to help arrange or help think about programming for us in the future. And please do check out our website, sustaininstitute.com. If you want to see a recording of this event, it should be up and live on our blog page tomorrow or the next day. And at that page, you can also check out past Sustainability Institute chats that we've had, and see some upcoming events like the Inspiring Sustainability Awards show. So again, Dr. Terry Allendorf, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone, thank you for your time, and we will see you next time.